In conflict, there are casualties. For over 120 years, Australian nurses have been in the very thick of it, doing their best to return the injured home to their loved ones. These stoic women witnessed the most unimaginable horrors and endured seemingly endless cycles of heartache. They had the courage and strength of the Anzacs, plus the ability to show compassion and tenderness to those in their care. Widely recognised as the founder of modern nursing, Florence Nightingale developed her revolutionary nursing procedures of cleanliness and natural light during the Crimean War. Her methods spread to Australia, and nursing became a respected career. Australia's first official military nursing contingent formed in 1898 to support the Commonwealth forces in the Boer War. The professionalism and achievements these pioneering nurses earned in Africa led to the formation of the Australian Army Nursing Service in July 1903. Military nurses had to be unmarried, well-educated, with 3 years training to qualify. Nursing was not a high-paying profession, and most nurses were financially supported by their families. Despite these constraints, thousands of women were passionately motivated to do their bit to assist our boys on overseas service. Never before had Australian women been presented with opportunities for independence, travel, and to learn new skills. Local nurse Lucretia from Baker's Gully was stationed in Egypt during World War I. She, like many nurses, would explore the pyramids in Cairo or sail the Nile on feluccas on their days off. War reversed the natural order of care. Nurses would now have to attend to the least wounded and less sick first, while those with the slimmest chance of survival were dealt with last. This practice was very confronting and fell heavily on the Australian nurses, who prided themselves as compassionate advocates for all patients in their care. Perhaps their greatest trait was their resilience and resourcefulness. On August 8, 1915, nurses landed on the desolate island of Lemnos. They had no clean first aid supplies, so they tore their petticoats into strips to make bandages for the wounded. The Australian nurses' uniform, with their iconic scarlet red capes, made them instantly recognisable to the diggers. But these early uniforms were cumbersome and made it difficult for the nurses to carry out their duties. Over time, nurses were able to adapt their uniforms to better suit the conditions and administer care to their patients. In the malaria season, we were supposed to wear veils, long gloves and puttees, which made it quite impossible to carry out our duties when men were rigoring and vomiting all night long. We just had to do away with the precautions and run the risk of being bitten by mosquitoes. The horrific injuries the nurses confronted were well documented in their diaries and letters home. Most people see amputated limbs as nice, rounded, finished-off stumps. We didn't get that. We had the ragged ends. The sights have been too awful for description. The wounds made by all the dum-dum and explosive bullets are really shocking. One man alone had 4 bullet wounds and 2 limbs broken, and that is the common run of things. The nurses had a definite appreciation of the mental impacts war had on the men. The boys' physical condition was well on the road of recovery, but quite often their mental outlook and recovery was a very slow process. By summer, there were many men that were shell-shocked, hallucinating, suicidal, or violent. The constant exposure to the carnage of warfare would forever change the lives of Australian nurses. I warn you not to expect dainty ladies on our return, as we may well be weather-beaten old hags. Much was expected of female Australian nurses. On one hand, they were expected to remain feminine and a sweetheart, a mother to every patient. Yet, they were often overworked, treating gruesome casualties in life-threatening situations. Not long into the First World War, Australian nurses were given the rank of officer. This recognition, however, didn't translate into equality. Their salaries were not only inferior to lower-ranking servicemen, but also to their peers from the British, Canadian, and Indian nursing services. The sexist behaviour of medical officers and orderlies continued. Nurses were often reminded that they were
too delicate
and should
stay home and knit, as war was men's business.
Many nurses found love and married. Since married women were not allowed to serve, their service was terminated on account of marriage. The treatment of women could waver during war. Clarendon nurse Nicky found this out the hard way. We set sail for destination unknown. It was a large convoy, aircraft carriers, destroyers, hospital ships, that sailed off on its own. That night, we all went to bed to sleep. In a calm sleep when about 1:30 a.m. we were torpedoed. The Alaska sailors in the boat didn't want us. Females were bad luck, and the boat slipped, and we went into the sea. We were eventually picked up after 8 hours. We lost 8 sisters and 200 troops. The army in their wisdom had never considered sisters being torpedoed, so all they had to kit us out with, men's battle dress and pants. I had a pair of size 8 men's boots. I take a size 3 ladies. A powerful advocate for Australian nurses was Major General Featherston. He wrote a scathing report of the conditions, the shameful treatment of the nurses, and the obstructive attitude, insults, and even threats of violence against the nurses serving in India during World War I. It wasn't long before the women of the Australian Army Nursing Service began to earn the respect they deserved. Some officers who earlier rejected offers of assistance from civilian nurses eventually praised them. Their contributions were even noted by the British.
It has been a great pleasure for me that Australia has been so adequately represented on the nursing staff of the Army during the operations.
Many nurses would suffer back pain, rheumatism, bronchitis, dysentery, or jaundice. Although the skillful nursing of their colleagues often saved them, Australia's first nurse to die on overseas service was Sister Fanny Hines during the Boer War. She died of an attack of pneumonia, contracted in devotion to duty. She was quite alone, with as many as 26 patients at one time, no possibility of assistance or relief, and without sufficient nourishment. Whilst hospitals and nursing staff were generally placed out of harm's way, the conditions of war changed, and nurses became more likely to be in the line of fire. Sister Nicky experienced the Blitz while serving in Liverpool. We were bombed, and bombed. 5 nights straight we had this. We were about 3/4 back up the ward when the next instant we were hurled the rest of the way. We must have been hurled, because I could never have run so fast. We were badly shaken. The ward had received a direct hit. Matron came on the scene. She told me off wholesale for my dirty apron and untidy appearance and to do something about it at once. When the Blitz was over, our hospital had received 4 direct hits, and as a result, many wards were out of action. We hadn't a window frame left in the whole place. But the work of tending to people went on. With the increasing risk to their safety, nurses began to receive weapons and survival training. There were unique dangers for the women of the Royal Australian Air Force Nursing Service when transporting the wounded in freezing conditions in unpressurized aeroplanes. On one occasion, we had to fly so high because of the weather that I became semi-conscious from lack of oxygen. Until the Second World War, most countries respected the Geneva Convention treaties. The Banker Island massacre was possibly the most heinous breach of the treaty. After their ship was torpedoed by the Japanese during the retreat of Singapore, 22 Australian nurses surrendered. The Japanese soldiers ordered the nurses into the sea, where they were machine-gunned in the back. The lone survivor, Vivian Bullwinkle, would later surrender again and become a prisoner of war. The conditions that these women endured were truly horrific. On the 8th day of each month, known as Degradation or Humiliation Day, the poultry vegetables that were issued were thrown into a cesspit, and the women made to retrieve them. On occasion, they were made to eat scraps from a pig bucket. Of the 32 women who were imprisoned throughout the war, 8 lost their lives during internment. Despite the dangers of war, Australian nurses kept returning to their posts after recovering from injury and illness. The heroism of Australian nurses is legendary. Sister Lucretia Smart was one of many nurses mentioned in dispatches for their gallant and distinguished services in the field. During the First World War, 8 Australian nurses were awarded the Military Medal, the nurses' equivalent of the Victoria Cross. 7 of these were awarded for acts of gallantry and devotion to duty under fire, while working in casualty clearing stations in France. Sister Eileen King, a Military Medal recipient, was serving in a tented field hospital in France when it was bombed. She had part of her left thigh broken away and received other serious wounds, but miraculously remained on duty and managed to get her wounded out of the burning tent. Soldiers who knew her described her as one of the bravest women they had ever met. Many nurses had brothers, cousins and friends fighting, so they felt a close connection to all their Aussie patients. They were like one large family. Matron Nell Espy remembered feeling safe, as long as I could see a digger's hat. Sister Jean Bissett, on a transport ship off the Dardanelles, wrote of one conversation in a letter home. "I see you've got an Australian hat. Are you from Australia?" He showed teeth from ear to ear and said, "Yes, and I noticed your rising sun badge the minute I saw you." The nurses' devotion to their patients is truly humbling. They would give up their own beds for patients they felt needed them more. They would share their care packages sent from home, and even use their own money to buy fresh food for the men, as the diet supplied by the army was inadequate. They empathised with the horrors these men had been through. I can never say enough in praise of these young men, cut down in the prime of their life. Their courage and humour was an inspiration to us all. To heal the broken, these women endured hell, often returning home mentally and physically scarred. Sadly, many were left alone and broke, as the pension paid to nurses was meagre. At the end of the First World War, Sister Anne Downell from Cherry Gardens recalled, "There is a certain amount of quiet excitement with most of us. Some are overjoyed and I wish I could feel as they do. But I am terribly depressed. When I went over to the home for morning tea, the sisters seemed very happy and excited and anticipating pleasure and freedom once more. It's wonderful, really. But I can't take in all that it means. I think of the gladness, then follows the sadness. And in the gladness I am saddest because I think of those who have lost, the mothers at home whose sunny boys are not going back to make them glad." After all the obstacles, all of the heartache, these heroic women endured to serve with devotion and professionalism, as this was the work we had gone overseas to do.